In China this week, the environment is shaping up alongside living standards and official corruption as issues with the potential to undermine the political legitimacy of the Communist Party's rule. The violent protests in Shifang in Sichuan province over environmental and health concerns about a metal processing plant led to the city's party chief backing down and promising to scrap the plant, rather than the protest being put down as would have been the case in the past. Welcome to Agenda with me, Colin Chapman. And joining me to discuss this is Stratfor's senior East Asian analyst, Rodger Baker. Rodger, this protest is somewhat different to what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, we've seen sporadically Chinese protests against environmental issues. We've seen farmers, for example, come out and protest land seizures using the justification that the industry that's going to be placed in the farmland is going to pollute or it's going to cause problems for them. And we've seen up and down over the last 5-6 years some of these types of environmentally spurred protests. In this case, one of the really interesting things that we saw is not only that this was environmental, but that in some ways, rather than being very, very localized, just the people immediately affected, there was the use of the Chinese internet communications to draw out a much larger crowd, a much broader pool of individuals to come out and protest this from the point of view of a general environmental issue, even more so than perhaps the specific issue of who is this going to hurt at this moment.
It's not Twitter, of course, because that's banned there, but there's a very sophisticated Chinese equivalent.
Yeah, one of the things we've seen in China is, of course, as the government tries to show how modern the country is and its improved internal communications methods, is that the Chinese have really picked up and run with these types of social networking tools, these Chinese tools. And even though the Chinese government tries to monitor them and at times control them or block certain searches, the Chinese people have found ways to move around to this very quickly. And so we see this new form of communication in China as allowing things that at one point really were remaining isolated in individual locations be able to spread very fast, not only inside China, but even outside of China.
This must alarm the authorities in Beijing. What are they doing about it?
Well, the government has a couple of things that they're doing. On the one hand, they've tried to put more restrictions on the hosting services and hold them responsible for the spread of what they would consider to be bad information. They have occasionally cracked down, they will shut down, they will close off searches, but it looks like they're really unable to control it because the more they try to put on restrictions, the more the population pushes back against that, finds alternative ways of communicating, or really finds ways to push back even some of these restrictions that the government is putting on them.
In Shifang, there was actually quite a bit of violence.
In this protest, it did break down into violence. Part of that was because the government, the local government, quickly declared this an illegal gathering and sent in the security forces to help to clear it out. This is different than we've seen earlier this year, where it seemed that the local governments and the central government were in agreement on more peaceful ways to resolve these types of protests. So on the one hand, the protest was successful in that it stopped the construction. On the other hand, it led to violent confrontations and warnings effectively that further protests here or perhaps in other parts of the country are going to be met by very similar rapid responses by security forces.
Right. Can we now turn to another issue that's causing tension, the economy? Zhu Yao, who's a leading academic, he argues China must now prepare for 3 years of hardship.
No, the Chinese have a really difficult time with the economy right now. As we've noted at Stratfor, the structural elements of the Chinese economy have always been something that was effective for rapid growth, but not for sustained economy once they reached a certain level. And the Chinese have always been able to deal with these short-term crises by doing a bunch of extra spending, a bunch of stopgap measures, and then they see the global economy kind of pick back up after 2 or 3 years. In this case, since the economic crisis in the United States and Europe, the global economy hasn't really recovered strongly. And so the Chinese first did some rushes to spend on infrastructure projects or on other types of rapid internal investment by the government. And then they started to back off on those, expecting their export markets to pick back up. And those markets never did. And now the Chinese are facing something that they've known about for a long time, but really have always tried to push off dealing with. And now with the leadership transition, they're still, again, more tempted to try to push it off and not deal with the real structural issues, because to do so may, in fact, require the Chinese to have some serious changes, not only in their economic structure, but subsequently in the social structure, and potentially even in the way in which the political elite interact with the country.
So the notion that China is going to be a locomotive to pull the world out of its economic woes is really a fallacy.
Yeah, I think counting on the Chinese economy as being the savior of the global economy was an idea that the Chinese certainly promoted back in 2008 and 2009. But even the Chinese have realized it's not the case. Other commentators may still be hitched to the idea because they've said it for so long, they just want to keep going with it, or they don't want to have to backtrack on what they've said. But we've seen the Chinese government start to lower their own growth forecasts. Their actions, with changing interest rates, with kind of turning a blind eye to the reclimbing investments in real estate and things of that sort, suggests that they're very worried about their growth rates slowing below levels that they may be able to manage.
Rodger Baker, thank you. And that's Agenda for this week. Thanks for joining us and enjoy your weekend. Hope to see you again soon.